And we affirm that no matter who you are or where you are in your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. So let's begin in silence. Take a deep breath. Just, if it helps to close your eyes, you can do that just to try to be here. Grace be in our heads and in our thinking. Grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. Grace be in our ears and in our hearing. Grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. Grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be at our ends and at our departing. And may what we do here cause us to grow in patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. So the morning after the election, I opened my computer to see that a dear friend had sent me a prayer written by Nadia Bose Weber, and it was accompanied by this slide. And the headline of Nadia's prayer email that day was, "I got nothing for you but this shitty little prayer." And that was my initial feeling about today. I got nothing for you. But I want to read you what Nadia wrote. Good morning, friends. I have to leave for the airport in less than an hour and cannot manage to finish sentences or finish packing. I'm sending you all love and this little prayer. And here's the prayer. Dear God, you're going to need to help me out today. If people in my life need some comfort and reassurance, it can't really come from me because today I am in need of the same. I just can't blow sunshine up anyone's ass today. So, Lord, I ask that you send what they need, please. If it is possible to remind us that millions of human beings throughout history have lived through worse political situations and still managed to make art and find joy and share meals and resist despair, could you do that for us, please? And then keep guiding us toward their wisdom. In fact, cover us all in a wisdom that is not available in memes and hot takes. And help us to remember to drink some water today. In other words, have mercy on us. Amen. Jeff McDonald loves Nadia and had asked me some time ago if we could see about getting her here. And we've initiated that process. I don't want to hold out any hope that we're going to be able to pull that off. But in case you don't know Nadia Bose Weber, you can look her up on the internet. She is a Lutheran pastor, and you might say she is not your grandmother's pastor. That's Nadia. She's an incredibly creative woman. You know, I have been a part of St. Paul's now for 37 years. And for the first time in my memory, and maybe the first time ever, this past Tuesday, we had 2 Eucharist services, one at noon and one at 7, which is an indication of how our church leadership saw the election that was taking place that day. And the response benediction to those services was this: If we're pleased with the results of today's election, yet let us yet in humility remember that every earthly authority must one day give way to your eternal rule. So let us in grace love all our neighbors well. Or if we are disappointed, let us resist all fear, anger, accusations, and bitterness, but instead renew our trust in you, and let us in grace love all our neighbors well. So I'm beginning this teaching today with all those words of prayer and pleading. By the way, though initially after the election I thought I would have nothing to say today, the challenge this week as the week evolved was what not to say. I think you took that in a way that I may not have meant it. There is so much stuff to process. And so I'm going to pick this up next Sunday, and I'm calling tentatively next Sunday's teaching Embracing Change and Living with Uncertainty, because we got to do that. I want to say one other thing about today, though it applies to every session that we have in here. I say this at some point in every counseling session I have, in every session of spiritual leadership or direction that I have. So I want to say it to you. If I say something today that doesn't make sense for you, doesn't fit, just throw it away. Just throw it away. If I say something that might seem, even though it's new, even though it might be uncomfortable, but if it makes sense, work with it. If I say something which you have a really intense reaction to, take that as something to work with. And don't make it about the teacher, whether it's me or anybody else. It's ours to work with. And yes, I can be wrong. Please don't tell that to Sherry. So last week in here, before the election, I offered a teaching called Jesus is Watching You. And my primary goal then, and today, is to teach information and knowledge about Jesus in a way that is relevant, that is attractive, and that is useful. The cultural context of our society last week was anxiety. Everybody on both sides of the great divide that is this country were anxious. Every news outlet informed us that this race was going to be razor thin. And some pollsters, people who have had sterling records of predicting outcomes of elections, said the Democrats would win. I said in here last week that we would not know the outcome of the election until maybe Friday or Saturday, because that's what we were told. All of that was wrong. I refused to watch the election results last Tuesday night. I watched an old Columbo instead. Episode 2, season 1. It's really old. But that was over about 10:30, and I turned off the DVD that machine. I'm one of the few people on the planet who still owns one of those. And I just went to the news for a minute, and I knew it's gone. The election is settled. Even before the western states' results were in, Trump had won the election. Today, I want to continue to teach about Jesus and how his life, full of God, can be useful for us. And I also want to say some things, because Jesus was very political, which I'll get to, about the election, and because people in our country are anxious and sad, at least some are. But before I begin that, I want to just clear out some assumptions and hopes that I have about this time. One is that my hope about talking about Jesus is not a turnoff for you. I know that it might be for many of you, and for a variety of reasons. Past experiences with church and the church's teachings have been misleading for you at best and harmful at worst. But I want to contend that Jesus is significant for us because he shows us what is humanly possible, especially in our ability, if we are open to it, of knowing God. And he shows us what doing, courage, love, hope, and justice looks like. This is both hopeful and useful. I also assume and hope that you know, that I know, that the Christian way is not the only way. Indeed, it's possible to be very courageous, very loving, very just from any of the living religious traditions or from none. Following Jesus is one way to be. It is not the only way to be. That's the danger of fundamentalism. I also assume that you know that we're not talking about something to believe in order to have something later. If we do this, believe this, hope this, then we're going to get what we want. I'm teaching about a way to live in trust and hope and love now, no matter what. Another assumption and hope I have has to do with mystery and mysticism. And this is somewhat related to what I said about belief. The mystic doesn't believe. The mystic knows. The mystic doesn't know about. The mystic just knows. Further, the mystic is open to a world of meaning and experience that transcends the level where we normally live. So much of our religious and spiritual thinking is shaped by the religion of our culture, which is consumerism. And consumerism is transactional. It is not transformational. The way of Jesus is transformational. And so in this culture, it is easy for any of us to think that if we do this, we get this. I will get the outcome I want. So another assumption, hope I have for myself and for us, is that we be open to something that transcends our culture. Jesus was a countercultural dude. And there is no doubt in my mind that if he were here in this culture, he would take a stand against what most of us value much of the time. Jesus called and calls people into a countercultural community. So it is entirely possible that you hear some of the teachings of Jesus, whether they're through me or somebody else's judgments. The popular image most people have of Jesus leaves the impression that Jesus taught about himself, about who he was, about how belief in him, even worship of him, was important. And I want to assure you that did not happen. Such an image of Jesus is just wrong. So here we encounter one of those paradoxes. That's another assumption and hope I have. And that is that we get comfortable with paradox. And the paradox here, if you can hold this, is that we believe that one of the most important things to believe is that the Christian way is not about believing. Okay? That's a paradox. Mystical language speaks in paradox, contradiction. It also speaks in Silence, that's a paradox, to speak in silence. It speaks in hyperbole. But much of what passes for Christian orthodoxy, and this goes in spades for what's taught in fundamentalism and Christian nationalism, was never part of the teaching of Jesus, nor for the first many centuries teachings about Jesus. What is known as correct Christian doctrine today is really the result of a conflict that came with the Enlightenment, and the churches claimed that its views were the infallible ones. So the church maintained that position for many centuries, and then there was a great split in the church. The first one around 10th, 11th century didn't cause this, but the big one that happened later ended up with the Catholics on one side claiming infallibility, and the Protestants on the other side claiming inerrancy. Both are wrong. There are several things I'm very grateful for about this election. I'm grateful that we have a democracy. The majority has spoken. They need to be listened to. You might not like what they say. I want to believe that every person who cast a vote had the same motive working in them that I did have in me. And that is, I voted what I thought was best for me, my country, and the people I love. In the part of my daily spiritual practice where I just sit and listen, the lines from our Eucharist liturgy kept coming to me over and over and over again this week. We have not heard the cry of the needy. We have not heard the cry of the needy. Many of us think that surely no one would want a person of Trump's character to lead them or to represent our country. We were wrong. The majority want, whether we agree with their values or not, overrode any of that. Which leads me to say that I am grateful that this election has pulled away the cover from our country. The majority has revealed who we are. Might be who you are. I'm talking about the heart of the country. We now have a high-chair tyrant who has frequent temper tantrums as our president, or we will in January. And I have clung to the illusion that our country, because of our affluence, our technology, our education, was better than some banana republic that have political systems that puts bozos, tyrants, and corrupt people into their highest offices. I thought we were better than that. We aren't. Our two political parties are dysfunctional. The Democrats are out of touch with the population. And in a span of about 10 years, the Republican Party has become almost cult-like, with its leaders in the party too fearful of Trump or blind to be actual representatives of the people. Now hear this clearly. I am not saying that the majority of our population is like Donald Trump. I'm not saying that. I am saying that it's okay to a majority of our population that Trump represent them. That's different. Now, I have struggled to say about what to say about Trump's character. Pages have been written. He's a narcissist. He's a pathological liar. Go to Google and look it up. Look up the Post article on Trump's lying. He's a racist. He has been found liable for sexual abuse and defamation and 26 other sexual assault allegations, and the list goes on. This is the person who will be our next president. And during the run-up to the election, person after person who had served with Trump came forward to say he is unfit. None of that mattered. Or to put it another way, what he offered was so appealing or seen as needed that those factors did not deter anyone who voted for him. Now, every person in this room, including me, can rationalize anything we want to believe and anything we want to do. Further, you can find a support group for anything that you believe or want to do. I'm serious. When I was in training, I was stunned to find out there is a support group online for pedophiles. There is. In 2016, when Trump was elected, it was a shock and surprise, but now we know what we're getting. You can remember how he handled COVID, his love letters to and from Kim Jong-un, and his best friend relationship with Putin. And I'll put on my psychology hat and tell you with great confidence, people with personality disorders do not change. Don't anticipate that. It ain't going to happen. I saw an interview with John Dickerson. He's the news analyst for CBS. So he's not Fox. He's not MSNBC. He's trying to meet down the middle. And he was asked what he felt about some of the threats, especially against the media, that Trump had made. And he was asked about this and other things. And Dickerson paused for a moment, and I'm thinking, projection, that he wanted to make sure he didn't offend anybody on either side. His response was 2 words: buckle up. Buckle up. Now, you know, another great result of the election is that we don't have to fear another January 6th. That ain't going to happen. The people in that demographic won. So one of the not good things about the outcome of the election is that unlike 2016, there are fewer guardrails now than then to protect our democracy. Our system of checks and balances, at least for a time, has gone away. One party controls, I don't think the Senate has been settled, House. But if it goes Republican, everything is Republican. House, Senate, Supreme Court, everything. Now, this is not my notes, but I would like for you to remember that there was a politician who won an election that was overwhelmingly in his favor. Overwhelmingly in his favor. That was Richard Nixon. We're still here. So last week I offered this teaching called Jesus is Watching You, and I meant it to be a teaching of comfort as a way to deal with our anxiety. And today I am calling the teaching Looking to Jesus, and I mean it to be a teaching of empowerment and a teaching that will enable us to see clearly, insofar as possible, where we are. First of all, I want to say how comforting and encouraging it is to stand here and see you gathered here. Ordinary Life is one of the many, many places in this country, all over the country, where people gather to work at recovering a spiritual understanding that embraces their tradition in a non-literal, non-exclusive way. So I am very grateful to and for you. And I hope you are grateful to and for each other. So we'll continue to meet. I'll be here next week and 13 more years. And that's it. And I'm quitting. So you heard somebody get up here today and announce a book group has started. You can do that. You can do that. You can say that you want to start a study group at 2025 and do it. Read it, Project 2025. Or you can get together and study something else. Or you can get together as a social group. I mean, a group to undertake, as the women of Ordinary Life do, some social project and deal with specific ways to address sexism and racism and xenophobia and all that other stuff. You can do that. You can do that. Christian nationalism is going to become more and more of a factor in our society. Trust me on this. We need to be educated. We need to be prepared. Today, I am attempting to teach about social and political transformation, which is a major part of the ministry of Jesus. Jesus was a Jewish mystic who focused on political issues, which I'll get to, of his time. Now, I don't want to overlook the personal transformation, but we're talking about social issues right now. Looking to Jesus as centering in the sacred is about social transformation. And when I mean social transformation, I'm talking about the systems that run things. Our social systems, economic systems, political systems, and the like. Now, I am aware that in many ways, I am preaching to the choir. You already know this stuff, or you should, in my opinion. Our task in the days ahead is going to be to help others see the political passion that is at the heart of our faith. Jesus had a relationship with the sacred that informed him about who he was, and he called that good news. And he wanted to share that. And he wanted people who got alongside of him to share that as well. And then he embodied and lived what he believed was the passion of God. Now, the social world in which Jesus lived, a world that's reflected throughout the entirety of the Hebrew Scriptures, can be described in 4 brief phrases. And as I describe them, these are from the Bible, I want you to see if you think there are parallels between that and our culture. The society of Jesus' day was politically oppressive. That is to say, it was ruled by people who had power, who kept the system the way that it did because it benefited them. It was an economically exploitive system. The wealthiest 1 or 2% not only controlled the wealth of the country, but also set up the system in a way that more and more wealth flowed to them. Third, this system was legitimized by religion. The social order was said to reflect the will of God. You know, though the social order was said to reflect the will of God, the people who tried to flee that in Europe came to this country, and they wanted to get away from the divine right of kings. But they drove the expansion of this country under a rubric that they call manifest destiny. It's another word for the rule of God. What we're doing is God's will. And then the other way to describe the world of Jesus, that it was a place of chronic violence. And by violence, I'm not talking about individual violence or criminal violence. I'm talking about the violence of warfare, intimidation of minorities. Probably no parallels between that and now. So one other thing about biblical stuff and then something else. In Judaism, there were 2 main narrative stories that informed everything. And we need to stay mindful of them if we want to understand Jesus better, because he is from that Jewish tradition. I'm going to mention two of them just briefly. The first is the story of the Exodus from Egypt, Egyptian bondage. That story is about freedom. It's about economic. It's about political bondage and freedom from such. It's about the creation of a new community of equality and economic justice. The second major theme running through the Jewish scripture is that of the prophetic tradition. So in the readings, if you read the Bible, you will hear about the law and the prophets, law and the prophets, law and the prophets. That's shorthand for Exodus and the prophetic tradition. The two main things that the prophetic tradition is about were about justice and peace. Justice for these people was all about economic justice, which is something that makes capitalists very uneasy because it was about distributive economic justice. That's biblical. So a feeling of economic injustice certainly played a major role in this recent election. There were other issues at play in this election that the Bible does not speak to, never speaks to. The Bible knows nothing about racism or democracy or sexism. But Jesus' passion was to love God and love neighbor. Or to put the same thing in other words, the passion of Jesus was compassion and justice. And those two words cannot be separated. Justice is the social form of compassion, and compassion is the heart of justice. This is a political vision. Now, what's a practical application of this? Well, one thing, it means that individually and collectively, we need a grounding, a base, a practice that empowers us to be aware of and then resist anything that creates injustice and violence in any form, and then to advocate for alternative visions. Or what else is the church for? Now, as tired as you may be of hearing it, there is no way to get to this without having a daily spiritual practice. We joke about it, but it's just a fact, folks. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it is inconvenient. And yes, it will save your life or give you a new life. It is that empowers us to have courage. This is what enables us to stand when everything else around us is falling. And this is the courage that enables us to resist the ways things are, because we know two things. If we look to Jesus, we know two things for sure. Things can be different, and that the powers that rule this world are not the ultimate power. But it's not just about standing against, it's also about standing for. I am not a politician. Thank you. And there's going to be dissecting of why this election went the way it did for days and days and days and days. I'm not going to get into that. We have to, if we looked at Jesus, stand for and against. We have to stand against and for. And I want to mention some areas of resistance and advocacy that if we look to Jesus for and about, we cannot ignore. That should always be on our radar, but really got stirred up in this election. I'm doing this because more than politics, this election was about character. It was about the character of the country. Kamala Harris is female and black. Trump campaigned on racism and misogyny and urged people to vote their bigotries. Doubt that? Just go listen to any of his rallies. They're on tape. So the first thing I want to speak to is racism. Many white people, you might be one of them, don't like to hear that they're racist. But if you are white in this culture, you are. I have a colleague who believes that all ethnicities, all humans are racist, because he says we're hardwired as a survival tool to notice who's different, and we react to who's different from us. There's a woman by the name of Jane Elliott who is known as a diversity educator now. She nailed this bit on racism for me in the work she's done. She is just such an amazing human being. She is now 90 and still going strong. She's another one of my role models. Attenborough, John Williams, these old guys. So on April the 4th, 1968, she turned on her TV set. She was a school teacher. And she was ironing at the time, and she saw news about the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And she said she vividly remembered seeing a reporter point a microphone toward a local black leader and asking, when our leader, referring to Kennedy's assassination, when our leader was killed several years ago, his widow held us together. Who's going to control your people? Now, she had been using in her teaching, because she at that time was really focused, because of where she lived, on indigenous population. She'd been teaching children using a great Sioux prayer to help them understand and embrace Native American people. And the prayer, which you've heard a version of, is, "Oh, Great Spirit, keep me from judging a man until I've walked in his moccasins." Right? But she shifted her focus and began teaching her students on what it might be like to walk in a black child's moccasins. And her work became, she gained notoriety. Her work became picked up in the news. She was part of a documentary on PBS called The Eye of the Storm, and soon as she was doing her teaching all over the world. So I want to play a clip of one of her talks. It's brief. I want you to take a deep breath, and I want you to imagine that Jane Elliott is speaking to you. So could we have the lights? It's not going to last long, so don't leave.
I want every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others.
She got a lot more courage than I got. You can turn them on. So this past Wednesday, after the noon Eucharist service, all of our clergy met. And then after that, I spent over an hour in conversation with Melinda Owen. I don't know how many of you know Melinda. She is our minister of pastoral care. I really love Melinda. She and I could not be more different in so many ways. But we just got a soul connection, and we have so much fun together. She's so smart and so creative. And I think she has one of the most difficult jobs in our church. She's the minister of pastoral care. So that means she's with you when you get married, when you're in a hospital, when your loved one dies, she's there. And she is doing an outstanding job. And she's black. And we talked for a long time about all the election. She's very heartbroken about the election. And she said to me, Bill, this is a quote, I asked for her permission. She said, Bill, white people have no idea what it's like to be black in a society and to be in a minority status. She and her husband live in the Woodlands. And she told me that he has been stopped innumerable times by the police. No speeding, no traffic violations, just stopped. Never ticketed, just stopped. And the question he is asked is, what are you doing here? And his answer, she says, is when he says, I live here, seems to take them back. She said no white person experiences that. Nor do white parents have to have the talk with their adolescent boys. What she means by the talk is how children should behave when they are stopped by the police. She asked me, do you think most white people know they're racist? And I said, no, I don't think so. Now, I know that St. Paul's likes to think of itself as a very inclusive, accepting congregation. But I had this thought. What if yesterday Jeff McDonald had been beamed up into the Starship Enterprise? It's always easier to talk about what if than something in the future, because if it's in the future, it makes you anxious. But since you know it didn't happen, so what if Jeff's gone? And the bishop appoints a black female senior pastor to St. Paul's. What do you think is going to be the reaction? You know in your heart what the answer to that is. Which brings another group I think we've got to have advocacy for in the days ahead, and that's the people in the LGBTQIA plus demographic. One of the lies that was told when the Methodist Church was splitting was the people on the right, the global people, said, you know, if you change the wording in the Book of Discipline, the bishop's going to appoint a gay or a lesbian pastor to your church. You know that, don't you? And my answer was, great. Why? Why? Because people in that demographic know what it's like to be who they are and to come out and to live that publicly. They could model for us what it's like to take what we say believe outside these walls and embrace it and enact it. I don't think that'd be a bad thing at all. You are aware of all the lies that were said about trans people in the political ads. They're just lies, just absolute lies. Now, I want to ask you to do one other thing in addition to having a daily spiritual practice. Tonight, or sometime before next Sunday, I want you to watch on Netflix Will and Harper. How many of you have seen it? I laughed and wept 70% of the way through this film. It's on Netflix. Will Harper of Saturday Night Live fame has a friend who transitions. And Will decides that they're going to take a road trip together from New York to L.A., and it's made into a documentary. I laugh because it's so funny. And I wept because I thought, how many Harpers have I encountered and not known it and not been affirming? Watch it. And yes, Harper needs a fashion consultant. And a hairstylist, right? She needs a hairstylist. But it's a beautiful film. I started to play the trailer, but it would take too much time for us to do that. Just watch it. Homophobia in all of its manifestations is really up there on the Christian nationalist agenda. And then there is one other thing, and that's our undocumented population. You know that St. Paul's has a Hispanic church, right? Fe y Esperanza is the name. So when we met on Wednesday, that was a major part of our conversation as clergy because of that church. That's part of our church. The Reverend Natalie Negretti is pastor of that church. And this is just a shot of the web page on St. Paul's web page. Many of these people are undocumented. But you can't ask who. That's just not possible. But they're our people. They belong here. And if you listen to what Trump promised, his number one first day in office agenda is to go after the illegals. Folks, these are our people. I'm just asking that we look to Jesus. Not that you be Democrat, not you be Republican, just look to Jesus. Jesus was a Jewish mystic. And the woman whose prayer, Nadia Bose-Weber, prayed that we remember that there are millions of human beings who throughout history have led lives through worse political situations, and they have nonetheless managed to make art, find joy, share meals, and resist despair. And she prayed that we might be led to be guided by their wisdom. So if you want to get a leg up on our time for next week, get or reread if you haven't read it. It consistently is one of the top 2,100 books ever written in English language. And that's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I'm going to talk about that next Sunday, but read it. And forgive the sexist language. It was the time, 40s, you know what they're. So there's no way to wrap up where we are in a pretty package, put a happy ribbon on top of it, and feel, well, that's taken care of. We're going to be working to get our hearts and minds around who we are as a country, who we are as a faith community, how we want to embody the things we say we believe as a faith community for the foreseeable future. And as the newsman said, it's going to be a bumpy ride. We're going to have to stay grounded. We're going to have to commit to awareness and resist any and everything that is contrary in this culture to compassion and justice. And I'm suggesting that the way we do that is by looking to Jesus. I want to read to you a passage from the Gospel of Mark. This is Mark's telling of the execution of Jesus. And in the narrative, Jesus is on the cross. And the reading is, at noon, the sky became extremely dark. This is a metaphor. This is not a news account. Jesus groaned out of the depths, crying loudly, my God, why have you abandoned me?" There are two birth stories in the scriptures we have of Jesus. They could not be more different. But we squish them together to come up with one narrative tale. We do that. By the way, there are no camels in the story. We just like to put them under the tree. Well, just so with the crucifixion story, there are different accounts, and they are all really, really, really different. But we squish them together and make one story. And in some churches, they even have the tradition of saying Jesus' last 7 words from the cross. We don't know what they were. You have to take 3 from this gospel and 2 from this one and to put them together. We have no idea. The community created parables about the death of Jesus that made sense to them, that served the purpose for which that particular document was written. So in Mark, the version ends by Jesus asking a question. Jesus is a Jewish mystic. And so the writer of Mark, whoever that was, put a Jewish mystical question in the mouth of Jesus. This question comes from the Psalms. Psalm 22. O God, why hast thou forsaken thy servant? You can't imagine somebody actually hanging on the cross and thinking, what I learned in Sunday school. Let's say that. Now, the version of Mark that's in everybody's Bible, if you have a Bible, is not in the original manuscript. The earliest manuscript that we have of the Gospel of Mark has Jesus crucified. He's placed in a tomb. Mary Magdalene and two other women come on a Sunday to anoint the body, and when they get there, the tomb is empty. There is a man who tells them Jesus is not here. They run away scared, tell no one. That's the end of the story. That's where it ends. There is no explanation of an empty tomb. There are no resurrection appearances. There's an empty tomb and there's fear. I think it's for that reason that Mark may be my favorite gospel. Because we find in it a Jesus who speaks his final word to God as a question. So what happened to Jesus? Where'd he go? What are his followers to do now? We want answers to these things, and believe me, there are religions out there that'll give them to you. Christian nationalism has the answers. I don't. Jesus doesn't get an answer to his question on the cross. The story ends as a cliffhanger. Now here's the thing. Here's the thing about looking to Jesus. We get to answer that question with our lives. We get to ask, who is feeling abandoned? Who's feeling forsaken? And how might we come alongside those people? On the other hand, if we're feeling forsaken and abandoned, we can take some comfort in knowing that's exactly how Jesus felt. We also get to answer the question about, where did Jesus go? Where's Jesus now? My faith is that Jesus shows up everywhere that we pursue justice, practice compassion, embrace forgiveness, and become radically inclusive. Our lives answer the question. I want to be clear. It's not our lives could be the answer. Our lives are the answer. How we live is how we answer that question. I had a professor of philosophy who said, you don't have to decide about this stuff today. You can wait. But you can't wait making up your life. Your life is going to get lived one way or the other. That's why I think I keep coming back to that lament confession. We've not heard the cry of the needy. So in the days ahead, when we may surely feel abandoned and forsaken, let's look to Jesus. In the days ahead, days when many of our brothers and sisters are going to feel abandoned and forsaken, let's look to Jesus and act accordingly. Every day I say it. Jesus with me, Jesus within me, Jesus behind me, Jesus before me. Jesus beside me, Jesus to win me, Jesus to comfort and restore me. Jesus beneath me, Jesus above me. Jesus in quiet, Jesus in danger. Jesus in the heart of all who love me. Jesus in the mouth of friend and stranger. See you here next week.